Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is, I don't know what day it's going to be because we are recording this episode in advance. That's why we're wearing the same clothes and have the same coffee cup. It's all the same as it was last week. But this is a special summer edition of the LSU Sports Insider. I'm Zach Ewing, joined by Reed Darcy and John Blau, two of our LSU beat writers for The Advocate. And today's episode is going to be the 5 games LSU cannot lose in this upcoming football season. And I know what you're going to say, and you can read John's story about this at theadvocate.com. You said the same thing. People are going to say, they can't lose any of the games. Don't lose any of them. And to a certain extent, I get that. We get that. But these are the pressure-packed, man, if you had to pick 5 swing games, these are the ones you want to win.
Yeah, and any football coach or knock this team will tell you that you don't want to lose any games ever. And obviously, there's no game that they think is more important than the other. But as us, writers and talking heads, we try to think of interesting things to talk about when nothing is happening in the summer. And looking at the schedule, there's just certain games where if you lose that, it's going to be really bad for vibes. You're going to have a lot of blowback, or it's just really inconvenient in terms of some of the other matchups you have coming up, in terms of how you are able to keep things going or how you finish. And so kind of identified 5 of those games, and we can go through those here.
Yeah, and we should note, Reed, these are like games that LSU could lose. We didn't put Louisiana State, Louisiana Tech, excuse me, or McNeese State on there. I mean, if LSU loses one of those games, something bigger picture has gone wrong, and we're having a totally different conversation. So we left those out.
Yeah, but I think these 5 that we picked out, I think I've got a 6th actually that I want to throw in there. It's like can we call them must win? Because it really just depends at what point you are in the season. But the bottom line, I think the schedule, looking at it right now in the summer, it's a very, very tough schedule. There's a lot of good programs on here, a lot of really good teams. Some teams that might be a little bit better than people are expecting them to be. There's some programs I think that have a bit of a higher ceiling than maybe they have had in years past. So we don't know exactly how it's going to shake out. It could look very different, but it's a very fun schedule, especially in terms of the home games. Very entertaining schedule, and I think the games we're going to talk about today, 5 or 6 of them, those are really the big ones, and really the pivotal games, and really why we're so excited about this season going forward, and what the schedule's going to be like. There's just so many storylines here, and I'm looking forward to this LSU football season about as much as a season as I can ever remember. So there's just so many compelling matchups, and to get to the playoff, you probably need to win 10 games, I would say, and so that's a very high bar when the schedule's as tough as it is.
Yeah, so the flip side of the Louisiana Techs and the McNeese game is there's a couple of games where it's like, well, it would be great to win that game, but it's hard to call it a must win. And I think you all probably know the games that we're talking about. So by process of elimination, maybe you can figure out the 5 games we're going to talk about. But let's go through them one by one. This is in chronological order, not necessarily ranked in any other way. So we're going to start with Clemson. And John, we talked about this one last week quite a bit, but it's pivotal. And it sets the tone for the season. It's a lot like last year's opener that set the tone so well for LSU, and obviously that didn't work out long term. But this one even more is, rather than being an opportunity to make a statement, you can't trip up here if you want to go where you're trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, this is the debut for Lane Kiffin, your grand investment, and this roster that you put so much money into. To be competitive right away. And so this is your first opportunity. It's at Tiger Stadium. And this is a Clemson team who, again, Dabo Swinney loves playing the underdog, and they've made some improvements in certain areas we can talk about since I covered Clemson, and I know plenty about it, but you're still expected to win as LSU. You have the more talented roster, and Clemson's got so many pieces they're trying to replace, especially at quarterback, a very inexperienced quarterback. So it's a game you're expected to win, and there's so much expectation for this era that if you start off with a loss, I think it's going to be really, really negative very, very quick.
I don't think they can gain a ton from winning because they're expected to win this game. And it's almost like if they lose, though, then it's kind of a problem. And we should couch the conversation that we're having today kind of in the whole scheme of how much pressure Lane Kiffin is under in year one and how important it is for him to win in year one. I think it is very, very important for him to get LSU to the playoff right away in year one. This isn't 2017, 2018, where it takes time to build a program, to stack recruiting classes. I think the fans will not have any kind of patience for this. I think they want to win right away. And that obviously starts with Clemson. I think in a previous era of college football, if you drop the opener, the first game as head coach, you can look at it and say, oh, they're just building. It's going to take some time to get everyone on the same page. I don't think that people are going to be as patient, especially nowadays in this environment of college football. Those kinds of excuses that you've had in the past do not apply. So that adds to the pressure of it. You win, everyone's like, good, that's what you're expected to do. But if you lose, it can get pretty dicey pretty fast.
The toxicity would be off the charts for a week one game if you did not win this game. And like, that's because the power brokers, the boosters, they have their own investment in this. I mean, they put tens of millions of dollars into this roster, and they expect results, quite frankly. And that doesn't have to be a national championship, but like, look, Lane Kiffin is squarely in the honeymoon period right now. John, I just realized we kind of introduced John in last week's episode and totally forgot that you had mentioned something that you wrote your introductory column at The Advocate and got, was it 13 emails and 12 were positive? Yes. That's the state of the LSU franchise or LSU fan base right now.
Yeah, I got 12 like really nice, like, welcome to Louisiana. You're going to love it here. Go do this, do that. And I got one email from a gentleman who said, go back to Clemson. And that was
get out of here.
Very succinct, and appreciated the direction, but I don't know if I can.
That guy was having a bad day.
He's having a bad day.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. But I bring that up because if LSU were to somehow lose this Clemson game through no fault of your own, you would be hearing that a lot more. Like the negativity would just increase everywhere around LSU football.
Yeah, and again, like you said, there's all these boosters who have their own investment. You went and got arguably the number one quarterback in the portal. I guess you could say number 2 or 3, top 3. I guess Mensa's in there as well. You went and got the number 1 offensive tackle. You went and got, these players from Ole Miss that you brought over who, obviously the Ole Miss fans aren't very happy about, poaching them. You've done everything you can possibly do to put yourself in position to win. If you don't win that game, people are going to ask, what is it? Like, what else could we have given you? What could have done? And this is your fault for not having us in position.
And that affects confidence in Lane Kiffin and staff moving forward for future seasons. If the season doesn't go as people think it will go or hope that it will go, then it can kind of get difficult to rebound from that. You've seen that going forward, and then I'm glad you mentioned that, John, because LSU really spent top dollar on all of the premium positions: quarterback, left tackle, and edge rusher. They got the best players, arguably, in the transfer portal at each of those positions: Sam Levitt, Jordan Seaton, and Princewell Uman-Mielen from Ole Miss. So the roster is very good. Being out there at spring practice, you can tell that this is a really, really good roster. But again, it has to all come together, especially on the offensive side of the ball. People have to be on the same page, and you have to do it quickly, especially for Sam Levitt and the receivers. They didn't do much at all in spring practice, and so it all has to come together in that month leading up to the season.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about doing this chronologically is if any loss early in the season just ratchets up the pressure on all of these other games, because you can probably afford to lose one of these games, maybe still get to 10-2. Maybe you can. At the same time, we're calling them can't lose games, so maybe you need all 5 of them. But this is one especially where you're an 11.5-point favorite. Like, you can't lose this game.
Yeah. And again, if you lose that game, the second game we're talking about is already insane.
What game is that?
That would be the second game on our list, which happens 2 weeks later on September the 19th in a place called Oxford, Mississippi, which will be completely over the top with emotion as Lane Kiffin returns to Ole Miss to face the Rebels. And this is a much more difficult game on paper than the Clemson game. But Reed, for not just reasons for this season, but just like emotional reasons, rivalry reasons, this is one LSU absolutely does not want to lose.
It's the game of the season in college football. It's the one everyone's going to be looking forward to. The SEC put it so early in the season just so that they can have as much juice in the matchup as possible. So they didn't want to get to like week 8 or whatever and one team's kind of out of it. They wanted this to be as early as possible. College game day is going to be there. There's going to be tons of national media there. We're trying to figure out exactly how we're going to cover it and how many people we're going to send there. It's like you can't. This game is massive, and I wish Rab were here because we'd love to get his thoughts on just the historical context of it and just how big of a game it is in terms of LSU history. I can think back, the game of the century, 2011, LSU Alabama. That game, it's kind of similar to that, but different in a whole kind of different way. Just the eyeballs and the pressure of it, and just the storylines and all of that. It's going to be wild, and it's as important, as big of a game that LSU has played, I think, this century. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic there. I don't think I'm being prisoner of the moment. I think the Lane Kiffin of it all, the messy divorce, the rivalry between LSU and Ole Miss, the fact that they're permanent opponents now, and the SEC's new scheduling format, everything is just coming together, and it's going to be very, very interesting, borderline unsafe, maybe, for LSU, Ole Miss players, coaches, staffers. And I didn't even mention the Vanity Fair article that Lane Kiffin did a couple of months ago that only added fuel to the fire.
It is going to be, let's look at this from two ways. Because on the field, your SEC opener against a fellow playoff contender, a road game, that's a really big game in any year. But John, this one just has so much more emotion attached to it because of the Kiffin angle that I'm honestly not sure what to expect. Like anything outrageous you tell me that might happen, I'd be like, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, and I don't know if it would be worse if they won or if they lose in terms of how the Ole Miss fans will respond. Regardless. And so, and just Lane talks about it. It sounds like he was really scarred a little bit by that exit. Feeling like he's going to get run off the road by a couple fans. And
you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you might have underestimated the sheer the amount of blowback that he got for making that move.
I think so.
Yeah.
He was trying to make it seem like, hey, this is a tough decision, but it's my personal decision, and it's something I need to do for my career, and maybe didn't grasp how much that was going to affect people, because Ole Miss has traditionally been like a little brother program of the SEC, and he brought them out of that. And now for him to turn his back on them is like, you can see where that emotion comes from.
But not just to turn his back, to do it right before they're about
Correct.
to go to the playoff.
Before they went, and then for them to have a really nice playoff run under Pete Golding, who happens to be a South Louisiana native, by the way. That's adding another layer to this. That now Ole Miss fans can kind of puff their chest out and say, well, look, we can do this without you. And so there's all of these crisscrossing emotional things that even I can't wait, and I'm dreading it all at the same time.
Yeah. And obviously there's the transfer portal stuff that happened too. Again, we're talking about Prince and TJ Daugherty. And then obviously if you go back to Clemson, then they steal Luke Farrelly, one of their portal players. And it was always, well, LSU did it to us, and Kiffin did it to us. There's just so much bad blood between those two programs right now that obviously what happens on the field, you think the players are going to be able to move past it. But again, the reaction and kind of what the narrative is after that game, it's going to be severely altered one way or another.
Yeah. You hear Ohio State and Michigan fans and, Miami and Florida fans and Florida State and some of these huge rivalries talk like this sometimes. But let me pose it to you this way. If LSU were to go 11-1 and make the playoff, but the loss is to Ole Miss, are people okay? I guess they'd be okay with that. By that time, it's early in the season. You kind of forget about it. I still think there'd be a little bit of a sour taste in people's mouths if that was the one loss.
Yeah, I guess so. It's tough for me to gauge because the LSU Ole Miss rivalry in its heyday is so old. It was a long time ago. LSU Ole Miss haven't been.
It's been very one-sided.
They're rivals.
Yeah, recently.
They are still rivals, historical rivals, but it hasn't been as fierce of a rivalry, I think, as it was, a long time ago. Like growing up in Louisiana, it was always Alabama for LSU. That was LSU's rival. And I think Rab, who grew up in a different era of LSU football and sports in Louisiana, I think he would tell you differently. Like LSU's rivals were more like Ole Miss and maybe Mississippi State to a lesser extent. Now I think depending on how this matchup goes and depending how Lane Kiffin's tenure at LSU goes and how Pete Golding fares at Ole Miss, I think you might see a bit of a resurgence here in the LSU Ole Miss rivalry. It makes a lot of sense between two schools and their geographical proximity and their history there. So depending on how it goes, if it's one sided, then it might not have that same fire. But if these two programs are kind of on an even level for the next 5 or so years, I think you could absolutely see LSU have a rival that's on par with what Michigan and Ohio State have. And that game becomes a defining part of your season, no matter what else happens the rest of the season, whether you win the national title even.
But I mean specifically for this year.
Yeah.
There's going to be some scar tissue for whoever loses this game for years to come. And that's why I kind of pose it that way. Is like, what if everything else goes right, but you lost that day in Oxford? Ole Miss people are going to hold that over LSU people for a long time.
Yeah, and I think Ole Miss people probably would be okay not making the playoff but beating LSU.
I agree.
I think if you flip that, definitely. But yeah, I think if LSU makes the playoff, obviously it will be interesting for the narrative and the story of Lane Kiffin. But I think if they make the playoff, they'll be okay losing that game.
Did somebody say playoff rematch?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Have it at Tiger Stadium, or a return trip to Oxford. That would also be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. Interestingly enough, with how good this schedule is, it kind of dips down in October. LSU plays McNeese in October. They have their bye week at the end of October. Kentucky, Mississippi State, a couple of the easier games. But the next game that you had on your list, John, is October 24th, and it's at Auburn. And this one is interesting, not just because, again, conference game, road game, going to be important, going to be difficult, but also because of how it sets up. Schedule-wise, it is sort of perfectly poised to either set you up for a big November run because you have the bye week, and then you have Alabama and Texas at home the following 2 weeks. Or it could really kind of derail any momentum you have.
Yeah, and you always think maybe a bye week helps. You lose the game, you can kind of reset. You talk to coaches and players, they hate sitting there for 2 weeks after a loss.
Yeah.
And to lose that game, especially when I think they'll probably be the favorite at LSU, but you do have just kind of a sleeping giant of a program at Auburn that has been trying to get back to where it used to be. And that would just be a huge moment for Alex Golesh and that program to be able to get that. And it would be just such a huge downer for Lane Kiffin and LSU to lose that if they were. And like you said, you'll be at home, but the mood and everything will just be different going in playing Alabama and Texas. And then you got Tennessee after that. So it's just such a inflection point in the schedule that I feel like if you lose that game, there's many kind of layers to it in terms of just for that season, but then also kind of the boost you're giving Auburn and you're taking away from yourself there.
Yeah, Reed, this is also, you got the first year coach angle here with Lane Kiffin and Alex Golesh. And they won't play every year, obviously, under the SEC's new scheduling format, but it's our first chance to see who's kind of started off on the right foot.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of Auburn and the roster. There's a lot of players from South Florida that have come, over to Auburn following Alex Golesh there. So a big unknown with the roster, but I definitely agree with what John said. At that point in the schedule, you can't really afford to lose that game because it's going to give you all kinds of negative momentum going into a really important stretch of the season. Now I can just picture at the end of October, LSU still being in playoff contention with these big games against Alabama and Texas and Tennessee right on the docket, needing to win at least 2 of those, I think, to still stay in contention. So you'd absolutely do not want to lose a road game against Auburn ahead of that stretch. Now, I think what works in LSU's favor is that it's at 11 a.m. I think it's probably good if you're having a road game at Auburn. You don't want to have a night game at Jordan-Hare. I think that would be good. That would get pretty scary, I think, for any visiting team. But overall, I think it's just Auburn's such an unknown. I'm not sure what to make of that roster yet. I think we need to see it before we have a feel for exactly how LSU will fare in that matchup.
Yeah, I could just see, it seems very possible LSU 6-1 going into this game. And you win it, and that sets you up for this November to remember with these huge matchups with Texas. And Alabama and Tennessee and maybe beyond. If you lose 6-2, now all of a sudden to make the playoff, you probably got to run the table in November, and that against that schedule is going to be really difficult. And so we said at the top we're going to skip over Alabama and Texas just because I don't think you can call those can't lose games, John. You could afford a loss in one of those games and still get where you want to get.
Yeah, and again, if you like we were talking about, if you lose to Clemson, so much more pressure going to Ole Miss. If you lose at Auburn, so much more pressure going into Alabama, Texas, and Tennessee to try to recover some of that momentum. And so, yeah, you can't lose that. If you were to lose Auburn, not Auburn, if you were to lose Alabama and Texas, these are, now blue blood SEC programs that are at the top, and this is a first-year coach at LSU. I think you kind of excuse it. You just can't lose the Auburn game, and I don't think you want to lose the Tennessee game for other reasons.
Yeah, so that's where we're going next. I would classify Alabama, that Texas, that 2-week stretch, both home games. You can't get swept.
Yeah,
but I don't think that either one individually is can't lose. So we skip forward to Tennessee, and this is the other interesting thing about the schedule. It ends with those 2 Titanic home games and then 2 road games, and that's where we're wrapping up. We start with Tennessee. People forget Lane Kiffin has this other SEC school that he has history with, where they're throwing mustard bottles and stuff at him when he went back to Knoxville as the coach at Ole Miss. Emotion, time kind of dulls that emotion. Still going to be probably up to a fever pitch there, especially if Tennessee is also in playoff contention.
Yeah, one of them a golf ball as well. I think the golf ball may have actually hit him, if I'm remembering right, and he has it in his office. And so, yeah, he obviously still remembers kind of the way things were the last time he went to Tennessee. And I think Tennessee fans, they're pretty raucous. If there's an SEC quote-unquote villain that is Lane Kiffin coming into town, I think that place is going to be pretty electric. And, again, coming off of those 2 really tough games against Alabama and Texas, you can't then slide again and lose to Tennessee, or you're, again, you may have been in a position, like you said, at 6-1, and you're, maybe you lost a game, and lost another game. Like maybe if you recover, you can get back into the playoff picture. But if you lose that game as well, then your season's gone completely off the rails. And so, just a very pivotal game, I think. There.
The emotions of it are interesting to me because when they were throwing mustard bottles and golf balls at Lane Kiffin, that was 10 to 12 years after he left that program, So that makes me think of Ole Miss and how it's so fresh and new it is, and how it's going to be his first time going back only a few months really after he left. I'm not sure what to make of that environment. People just love to hate Lane Kiffin, and I'd imagine the Tennessee fans, given his similar move, they kind of have some empathy for Ole Miss fans. But yeah, it's going to be one of those emotionally charged environments. It's going to be one of the top games on Tennessee's schedule, so that program and that fan base is going to be up for it. Similar question with Auburn here. I'm not really totally sure about the roster, like who is playing quarterback for Tennessee. Josh Heupel tends to figure things out with his offense, and they tend to, just keep it rolling and keep producing good offenses. But again, they've got quarterback concerns. I'm not sure who's going to be that guy for them. So again, another one of those teams that kind of have a wide range of outcomes that I'm not sure what to expect from them.
This one could quite literally be can't lose if you're going to make the playoff. You're 8-2 going in. Maybe both teams. We'll see what Tennessee is, but they're both. LSU is the home game against Texas the week before. Tennessee has a trip to Texas A&M the week before. So very difficult games before, and then you come in and season could be on the line. So that will also be the case for the last game on our list, and that is the trip to Arkansas. Arkansas, another team with a new coach. Historically, Reed, you can speak to this. It's never easy for LSU going up there. It doesn't.
Something about it.
Even if Arkansas is not any good, it's never easy.
Yeah, something about that place is tough for LSU to play. I think there was a stretch there the last year of Orgeron's tenure and the first few of Brian Kelly's tenure where all those games were 1-score games, I believe. And you maybe they were all decided by 3 points. I'd have to look back, but they're always something about it. Always something. Those games are close, and they're especially tougher on the road, even when LSU has the perceived advantage in talent and the perceived roster advantage. It seems like Arkansas always plays them well. Now that was under Sam Pittman, different regime. Now you've got Ryan Silverfield there. It's again new coach, new program, whole bunch of new players. You don't know what to expect, but this is a timing thing. You don't want to lose your regular season finale, especially if you're still in playoff contention there, and you've got all these difficult games that you've already played. It kind of might even be somewhat of a trap game of sorts if LSU's in that position, just because they might be looking ahead at that point. Maybe they've beaten Alabama or Texas or Tennessee, 2 of those 3, and they're still in the mix for the playoff, and they're looking ahead maybe to the SEC title game or the first round of the playoff. You don't want to slip up in Fayetteville, especially when that is usually a tough place to play. It's going to be cold and windy as well, so that adds to it.
Yeah, it's an exhale spot a little bit after you play Alabama, Texas, Tennessee. If LSU gets through that gauntlet and is still in playoff position, it's an early kickoff in Fayetteville, back on Thanksgiving weekend, a lot going on. Just got to stay focused.
Yeah. And what if you have a bad season and that's the last game and you lose?
Good point.
And again, Ryan Silverfield's taken over a program that was 2-10 last year, and you spent all this money on this roster, and you're having a bad year, and then you lose to Arkansas. That would
can't do it.
Can't do it.
Yeah, that's why we say there can't lose games. So that's the 5. Reed, you had a 6th one. I think I know where you're going with this, but tell us what your 6th.
Why don't you? Yeah. So which one
Is it? Texas A&M?
No,
Let's
it's
say
actually
Kentucky.
It's actually Kentucky.
Kentucky was my second guess. Yeah,
It's Kentucky, just because I'm actually kind of high on Kentucky this year. I think they might be a pretty good team. I like what they did in the transfer portal, top 10 class. And I think Will Stein, he's a good offensive mind, a sharp guy, and I think he can put together a pretty good offense. I think going back to the offseason, they didn't have to fire Mark Stoops. He had a pretty large buyout. They could have kept him on board and just gotten whatever they got out of him. But I think they look at the landscape of college football and they made a calculation that a lot of programs made, and that they need football to be good in order to be the rising tide that lifts all boats. And they can't afford to have this apathetic kind of mindset to the football program. And so they paid a hefty price to move on from Stoops. They hired Will Stein as a first-time head coach from Oregon, and they gave him quite a bit of, resources to invest in the roster. I think they put together a pretty solid roster. I think people were surprised by some of the moves they made in the portal. They wound up with a top 10 class at the end of it. So I think they might be a team that kind of surprises some people, in which case LSU is going on the road in the middle of kind of their scheduled lull, or what it's supposed to be a lull in October. And so, you can't, they don't ever go to Kentucky very often, but I look at that as one you can't really afford to lose, especially if Kentucky is going to be better than some people are expecting them to be.
And Lane, I think, actually talked about just again how you want to be good immediately, but the SEC isn't as stacked as it. You can't stack teams like you used to at Alabama. You can't just have every 5-star on your roster. And some of these, he used Kentucky as an example. He's talking about Georgia as a backup linebacker, and Kentucky calls and says, "Hey, you can be a starter, and I can pay you starters money."
Right.
And Kentucky gets that player. And so there are players like that all over the SEC. And Kentucky's one of those programs that did a good job in the portal, like Reed was saying.
Yeah, and I'm looking at this now and thinking about the 5 games that you kind of selected, John, and then adding Kentucky, Reed. And I think you're right about them. Like LSU, if they want to have a successful season, needs to win these games. 5 of the 6 games we've highlighted here are road games. So now you go back and you look at it big picture and you go, well, you can't be losing a bunch of home games. So we're sort of back to where we started, saying there's not a lot of games on there you want to lose. And that's true. Like if you do want to be a college football playoff team, we think 10-2 is probably the benchmark. Maybe with a 9-game SEC schedule, depending on what happens elsewhere, a 9-3 team slips in somewhere. Like certainly a team with LSU's schedule, if it's as good as it looks now, they would be a candidate at least at 9-3. But you can't. That doesn't exist in a vacuum. That depends on what everybody else does around the country too. So, but I mean, the games we didn't mention, home games against Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Alabama, and Texas, those 4 games, like you probably want to go 3-1 in those games, because you can't just expect to sweep your road games either.
Yeah. And especially Alabama and Texas back to back. It's very tough.
Yeah, I think you're hoping that the home field advantage helps you and against some of those games, so you can kind of take one of those, Texas or Alabama, and you're in a pretty good spot. But that's why I put so much pressure on the road at some of these places. You can't drop those games because your margin for error is just so thin.
I would say if you just looked at power rankings and national championship odds and things like that, like your 4 toughest opponents are probably Texas, Alabama, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. 3 of those games are home games. That could be a good thing or a bad thing. You can get the home field advantage and give you a boost and really get statement victories. But if you lose them, now all of a sudden you've got sort of those swing games that we're talking about here all on the road.
Yeah. It's like Reed said, it's a really fun schedule. It's a tricky schedule. It should be interesting in terms of, again, some of these really important road matchups, really like premier home matchups. Again, having 2 of the first 3 games are game day games, ESPN game day. There's just a lot of attention, a lot of just energy around them. So yeah, it's an interesting schedule, and there are plenty of opportunities to trip up. You obviously don't want to if you're going to have success.
You can't go 8-4. This program, this team can't afford to go 8-4.
This is that would be definitely a disappointment. That would bring the toxicity back. It would put a tremendous amount of pressure on 2027, and so that's why these are our can't lose. Brought to you by Friday Night Lights. Clear eyes, full hearts. Can't lose these games. I forgot to mention this last week, so I need to mention it at the end. But FMOL Health, Our Lady of the Lake, is the official championship healthcare provider of LSU athletics. And with that said, we are going to sign off for the day. Our producer today was Molly Ballinger. For Reed Darcy and John Blau, I'm Zach Ewing. We'll see you next time on the LSU Insider.